The jungle primary has a verdict. Becerra and Hilton are moving on, and Tom Steyer's personal fortune did not buy him a spot on the November ballot. This is California governor's race. I'm Cassidy. The vote watching is over, and now we're in the part where the money gets counted twice. Who actually funded the supposed underdog? What does $32 million in opposition spending buy? And where does Hilton's Trump number land once November voters show up?
Adam here. The primary math is done. Now I want to know whether Hilton's floor turns into his ceiling in a statewide general, and whether Becerra's coalition can hold without the Steyer voters who drifted off all spring.
And Becerra called himself an underdog on election night. Now the San Mateo Daily Journal donor map just dropped, so we can finally see whether that line holds up against the names on the page. Here's Ben Christopher at CalMatters.
California's wild and wide-open primary election came to a close Tuesday, with voters consolidating behind leading candidates for their parties. It was a good night for normie Democrats, a bad one for self-funded campaigns, a mixed bag for state legislators aspiring to higher office, and another electoral reminder of President Donald Trump's dominant role in our politics, even in deepest blue California.
CalMatters leads with, "It was a good night for normie Democrats." And yeah, that fits Becerra pretty well. But then you've got the underdog label he used on election night, plus the San Mateo Daily Journal donor map that's public now. Those two things belong in the same conversation before the general gets rolling.
The money can't buy you love headline writes itself for Steyer. But the more interesting number is still the same. This was the most expensive primary in state history, and the guy who outspent everybody came in third. So what's the November floor supposed to be for donor maps on both sides?
CalMatters also points to Trump's dominant role even in deepest blue California, and that's the Hilton thread heading into November. A jungle primary electorate and a general election electorate in a state Biden won by 29 points are just different beasts. The endorsement got him through. That's probably the last time that helps him this much. Michael Barabak, writing in the Los Angeles Times,
Not long ago, Xavier Becerra was written off as politically dead. Now, he appears headed for November's general election for California governor. After all the buildup, fear, and uncertainty, the most wide-open and unpredictable California gubernatorial primary in decades appears to have ended in the most consistent and predictable of ways.
Barabak's three takeaways, youth lost, money lost, no women advance, are clean column lines. But before we turn them into structure, the real question is whether any of that shows up in the precinct-level totals, or whether he's backfilling a narrative from an outcome CalMatters had already handed us.
The youth angle is the one worth stress testing. If Steyer's younger voter coalition bled out and he still finished third, those voters don't vanish in November. They go somewhere. Becerra's general election math depends on where, and Barabak doesn't really answer that.
The underdog framing is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Barabak brings in the Gray-Davis parallel, which is a real historical comp, but the San Mateo Daily Journal donor map is public now. Before anybody canonizes the underdog story, someone has to read the names on that list.
When we hear that outside money is flooding California's governor's race, what does that actually mean? Who's writing the checks? What are they allowed to pay for? And do the candidates have any say in any of it?
So let's break it down. The California governor's race has already crossed roughly $400 million in total primary spending, making it the most expensive governor's race on record, per reporting from the SF Standard and CalMatters. A big chunk of that is candidate-controlled money, donations made directly to a campaign, with legal limits on who can give and how much. Then there's independent spending, and that's where it gets interesting. That's money spent by outside groups, billionaires, corporations, unions, trade associations, who can run their own ads and mailers as long as they don't formally coordinate with a candidate's campaign. The most striking example here is Tom Steyer, who is himself a candidate. But the broader pattern holds across the field. CalMatters found that big oil and other major interests are pouring money into independent expenditure committees supporting or attacking various candidates. And per semaphore, some of that money is flowing in less obvious directions, including paid posts to Instagram influencer accounts with tens of millions of followers, which California now requires to be disclosed, but which can still be hard for ordinary voters to spot as political advertising.
If a billionaire is technically barred from coordinating with a campaign, how much does that firewall really matter? Especially when the candidate is the billionaire, like Steyer.
That's exactly the tension critics are pointing to. Steyer has personally spent or booked more than $195 million in ads. broadcast, cable, radio, which is more than 20 times what his nearest rival has spent, according to ad impact data cited by the AP. When the candidate and the money source are the same person, the coordination firewall is basically irrelevant, which is why this race has turned into a test case for what modern campaign finance law does and doesn't constrain. Watch whether California's disclosure rules, especially around influencer and digital spending, get tightened because of the scrutiny this race is generating. This one's from Al Jazeera.
California's next governor, who will succeed Democrat Gavin Newsom after he serves the maximum 2 terms, will take charge of a $4 trillion economy, among the largest in the world, while confronting deep challenges, including water accessibility, affordability, and homelessness.
Al Jazeera has the early call confirmed. Hilton at 26.9, Becerra at 25.7, with 3/4 of precincts in, about 49,000 votes separating them. That's your November matchup. And Becerra is already calling it an underdog story, which is the part worth sitting with now that the San Mateo Daily Journal donor map is public.
Hilton clearing 26% in a jungle primary with a Trump endorsement. That's a real number in a D+20 state. The question I'm stress testing is whether that exact ceiling is what he runs into in November, when the electorate isn't just high-propensity primary voters.
And on the Democratic side, Underdog is doing a lot of work for a candidate whose donor map we haven't actually read yet. That's the first accountability question the general opens with. AL.com writes,
2 Democrats and a Republican were leading in early returns Tuesday in California's crowded primary for governor, a campaign that tested voters' appetites for an experienced politician or candidates promising change. Democrat Xavier Becerra, a former state attorney general and U.S. health secretary, pitched himself as a steady leader able to work the levers of government.
The AP framing here is experience versus change. Tidy, sure, but the vote already happened and Steyer, the change candidate with the biggest checkbook, finished third. The frame didn't match the result.
Hilton's closing line before polls shut. This state needs change and it can't be provided by a Democrat. That's a November message, not a primary message. He basically handed you the general election script against Becerra.
And Becerra gets to answer with, steady hand knows the levers of government, which works fine until someone pulls the San Mateo donor map and asks, which levers exactly, and who's paying to pull them? If California governor's race is helping you stay informed, take a moment to subscribe and leave a review wherever you're listening. It really helps other people find the show. We've put links to every story from today's briefing in the show notes, so if one caught your ear, you can follow it there and read more. That's California governor's race for today. This is a Lantern podcast.